I, 28M, discovered my wife, 27F, was having an affair on Easter Sunday, and the evidence left no room for doubt. The next day, I confronted her, laid out what I'd uncovered, and made my decision. I walked away. Since then, I've had no contact with her, nor do I plan to. We're divorcing, though it feels like a futile act in the face of how deeply broken I am. I truly believed my wife, and I had a perfect relationship. She was my best friend, and it felt like we were made for each other. Our bond was one of those rare ones you read about in love stories. We had been inseparable since high school, dating through our last 2 years there and throughout college. She was my first in every way that mattered, and I was hers. After graduation, we got married and built a life together in a city close to our families. I started my career as an engineer, earning a comfortable salary, and she landed her dream job teaching at a prestigious private school. Financially, we were stable and thriving. Our days were filled with joy, traveling, dining out, sharing hobbies, and spending time with friends. We couldn't go anywhere without gravitating toward each other. Our love so palpable that even strangers might have mistaken us for newlyweds. Intimacy was never an issue. We had an active and fulfilling sex life. We were even preparing to start a family soon, a step I had eagerly anticipated. Or at least, that's what I thought our life was. I realize now it was all a lie. The betrayal has crushed every hope and dream I had for the future. I can't stop crying. The idea of being a father, once a beautiful certainty, now feels unattainable. The unraveling began on Easter morning. We'd volunteered to help hide Easter eggs for our church's children's event. After waking up early and skipping showers, we threw on casual clothes and drove to the church. Together, we hid brightly colored eggs, snapped pictures with the congregation, and shared coffee and donuts. My wife took numerous photos, capturing the cheerful moments of the day. By the time we returned home, she was ready to go back to bed, and I was looking forward to reading about the NCAA basketball championship game happening the next night. My dad's alma mater, Baylor, was playing. I had brought my wife's iPad along, as I often used it like it was mine. She didn't mind, and I certainly didn't expect to find anything unusual on it. But as I was reading an article, a strange icon appeared in the corner of the screen. It displayed a series of photos in rapid succession, pictures she had taken earlier at the church. Then, mixed in with the wholesome snapshots, I glimpsed something shocking. Images that appeared to contain nudity. Confused, I tried to go back and view them again, but they disappeared. Checking the iPad's photo library yielded nothing. It was as though the pictures had never been there. As she casually walked upstairs to nap, water bottle in hand, I felt the first cracks in my trust. I had never doubted her before, but now, unease settled in my chest like a stone. Could she be hiding something? Determined to ease my mind, I decided to check her phone. Upstairs, I found her soundly asleep. Taking her phone from the charger, I attempted to unlock it, only to discover that the passcode had been changed. My heart sank. We had always had an open approach to technology, using each other's devices freely. But now, faced with this barrier, the truth became impossible to ignore. There was something she didn't want me to see. I placed the phone back on the charger, my mind racing with denial and dread. Part of me wanted to convince myself it was nothing, just a misunderstanding or a technical hiccup. Maybe I'd imagined the risque images, and the passcode change had an innocent explanation. Yet, deep down, I knew better. The weight of her secrecy was undeniable, and I felt my world beginning to crumble. I tried to act as normal as possible, but it was a monumental effort. My wife knew me better than anyone, and masking my emotions while also trying to gather evidence felt nearly impossible. Late that afternoon, as she stood in the kitchen, her phone chimed with a text alert. Peeking around the corner, I caught her entering a new passcode, a confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. My suspicions solidified, though I still clung to a faint hope that I was wrong. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I took her phone into the bathroom. This time, I entered the passcode I'd memorized earlier. I scrolled through her photos but found nothing incriminating. Even the pictures she'd taken at church that morning were there. Normal, innocent snapshots. My chest loosened slightly, thinking maybe I'd overreacted. But just as I was about to close the app, I decided to check the deleted photos folder. What I found turned my blood cold. 2 nude photos of my wife appeared, along with a third of a naked man, someone who was clearly not me. My heart raced as I quickly forwarded the pictures to my own phone, deleted the evidence of my actions, and returned her phone to its charger. The shock sent me to the downstairs bathroom, where I vomited violently, my body unable to process what I had just discovered. Those pictures were unlike anything I had ever seen from her. My wife wasn't the type to take intimate photos, and I'd never felt the need to ask her for any. We believed that keeping such images private was just one more way we protected our relationship. And yet, there they were, proof of something I couldn't yet fully comprehend. The man in the photo could have been anyone, and I didn't recognize him, but that didn't matter. The betrayal felt like a knife in my gut, and the pain overwhelmed me. I cried harder than I ever had in my life, curled on the floor, unable to contain the tidal wave of emotion. I barely slept that night, lying next to the woman who had torn my heart to pieces. When morning came, I dragged myself to work, though my mind was far from my job. Every project I had was pushed aside as I dove into research on how to recover deleted text messages. Since our phone plan was in my name through my employer, I had access to all messages sent through our devices. It didn't take long to uncover everything. Raunchy texts, selfies, explicit pictures, and even videos. The evidence was overwhelming. I dry-heaved as I absorbed it all, every new piece of proof stabbing deeper into my heart. My body had nothing left to expel. I sat in my car, clutching my phone, and sobbed so hard I thought my tears might turn to blood. The love I had for my wife shattered entirely, replaced by rage and despair. The future I had envisioned, the children we'd talked about, the life we'd planned, was obliterated in an instant. I screamed, primal and guttural, thankful that she wasn't there to see me at my lowest. I had no idea what I was capable of in that moment, but I knew I couldn't face her. Not yet. Aimless, I drove around for hours, tears and anger battling for control. At one point, I considered sending the evidence to both our families, airing everything, and then ending my own life. The thought terrified me, but it also reflected how destroyed I felt. The betrayal of my best friend, my wife, had pushed me into a darkness I couldn't escape. The person I would have turned to in such a moment was the very one who had betrayed me. I was utterly alone. Eventually, I parked near her school, waiting to see where she went after work. I assumed, based on the messages, that she'd head straight to her lover's place. But to my surprise, she drove directly home. Oblivious to my presence, she went about her routine as if nothing was wrong. At work, I'd printed out every incriminating text and photo I'd uncovered. My plan was to confront her with the evidence, but the thought of seeing her face made me physically ill. I didn't want a dramatic fight or hours of denial and gaslighting. I didn't want to argue or negotiate. I didn't even want to look at her. I just wanted to pack my things and leave. When I entered the house, there she was, sitting on the couch with her phone in hand. Maybe she was texting her mom or her sister, or maybe she was texting him. At that point, it didn't matter. The sight of her scrolling casually, oblivious to the devastation she'd caused, sent a wave of fury through me. Whatever love I had left for her had been annihilated. In less than 24 hours, my world had turned to ash. As much as I hated her, I hated myself more for ever trusting her. She greeted me with a smile when I walked in, casually commenting on how I was home early. I didn't reply. Without sparing her a glance, I headed down the hallway into our bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a suitcase. I began packing clothes for the week, fully intending to check into a hotel. Moments later, she appeared in the doorway, her voice tinged with curiosity as she asked if I was leaving for a sudden work trip. I paused, staring at her with a look that could only be described as pure loathing. Then, without a word, I returned to packing. Concerned, she came closer, gently placing her hand on my back and asking what was wrong. Her touch made my skin crawl. I recoiled instinctively, as if she had doused me in something toxic. Turning to face her, I shouted for her to never touch me again and shoved her away, my voice shaking with fury. When she tried to press for answers, I unleashed a torrent of anger, calling her a disease-ridden whore and spitting venomous words about how she deserved to be physically punished for betraying me. Her face twisted in shock, and for a brief moment, I almost saw a flicker of pain. But I had no sympathy left. I pulled the stack of incriminating papers from my bag, throwing them onto the bed in front of her. As she sat down to sift through them, I snapped my suitcase shut and left the room. Before I even made it to the front door, I heard her cry out, a guttural, heart-wrenching "no" that echoed through the hallway. Her sobs followed me, but I didn't turn back. I tossed my suitcase into the car and climbed in. She emerged from the house, running after me, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't care. I raised my middle finger in her direction as I sped off. My phone immediately began lighting up with calls and messages, each vibration amplifying my rage. Without hesitation, I shut it off. I had no intention of hearing her excuses, apologies, or explanations. Infidelity was the one line she knew I would never tolerate, and she had crossed it. Her reasons didn't matter. The damage was done, and I was done with her. I checked into a modest motel near my job, dragging myself to the attached diner for a meal I had no appetite for. After forcing down a few bites, I returned to my room and called my mom from the motel phone. She had been frantic, already aware that something was wrong after my wife had called her. When I told her what I had discovered, the line went silent except for her shaky breaths. I explained that we were divorcing, that I'd be leaving the state to start over, and that I wanted her to keep this between our immediate family. Her sobs broke my heart. I could hear her struggling to process the news, mourning not just the loss of my marriage, but the grandchildren she'd never have from me. My mom understood me well enough to know that when I said I was done, I meant it. Still, hearing her grief was almost unbearable. By the time I hung up, I was utterly drained. I cried myself to sleep, the weight of my shattered life pressing down on me. But my reprieve was short-lived. Around midnight, a knock at the door jolted me awake. Groggy and disoriented, I peered through the peephole to see my soon-to-be ex-wife, her face etched with desperation. I couldn't fathom how she'd found me, much less my exact room, but one thing was clear. I had no intention of letting her in. Instead, I picked up the motel phone and called the local police. I calmly explained the situation, staying on the line as they dispatched officers to the scene. Minutes later, I watched through the peephole as two officers approached her, spoke briefly, and led her away to their squad car. One of them then knocked on my door, and I let him in. He assured me they would ensure she stayed away and asked how I wanted to proceed. Without hesitation, I told him I wanted no contact with her, ever. He helped me fill out the paperwork for a restraining order and carefully explained its implications, noting that it would prevent me from returning to our house alone. I didn't hesitate. I told him I never wanted to step foot in that house again. She could have it. All of it. The house, the belongings. It didn't matter. None of it was worth staying tethered to her in any way. The officer had her sign the order before they drove off. I stood at the window, watching the taillights disappear into the night. Only then did I crawl back into bed, my body too exhausted to process anything more. For a few fleeting hours, I managed to sleep, knowing that I had taken my first step toward cutting her from my life for good. The next morning, I made it to work, though every step felt like trudging through quicksand. My colleagues greeted me with concern, asking if I was feeling better. They assumed my early departure the day before was due to illness. I nodded and told them I was still under the weather, adding that I'd stay in my office all day to avoid spreading anything contagious. The truth was, I needed the solitude. I called my boss and asked if he could meet me in my office. 15 minutes later, he was seated across from me, likely expecting an update on the project my team had been working on. Instead, I leveled with him. I explained that I'd discovered my wife's infidelity the day before and that my marriage was over. He sat in stunned silence, his expression mirroring the shock I'd felt. I didn't share any details about my plans to leave the state or find a new job, but I made it clear that reconciliation was impossible. To me, my wife was as good as dead. It took all my willpower not to break down during that conversation. I told him that, for the time being, work would be my lifeline, a distraction from the personal hell I was enduring. I needed the challenge of my job far more than I needed the paycheck. He nodded empathetically and assured me that I could work as much as I wanted. He even offered the use of my office as a place to crash if needed. His kindness felt like a lifeline in a storm, and I thanked him, asking that he keep everything confidential until word inevitably got out. After work, I went to my parents' house for dinner. They had invited my siblings and their spouses as well. Dinner was winding down when my parents called me aside, suggesting I share the truth with everyone. I hesitated, but as I began to speak, the atmosphere shifted. My revelation ruined any remaining appetite in the room. The shock and anger mirrored my own. Two of my siblings admitted they'd received calls from my ex after I left and had initially felt sorry for her. Now, they were furious, wishing they'd known the truth so they could have given her a piece of their minds. I asked them, and the rest of my family, to cut all ties with her and anyone connected to her. It wasn't her family's fault she was a cheat, but I wanted nothing to do with any of them. My wife had proven herself unworthy of attention, whether positive or negative. I explained my plan to find a job in another state, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the wreckage she had created. While some family members understood, others were angry, not at me, but at the situation. It felt grossly unfair that I was the one uprooting my life while she carried on in the same town. But I knew staying was not an option for me. The following day, I had my first meeting with my lawyer. I live in an at-fault state, so the stack of evidence I brought with me was a goldmine for her. I entered that meeting determined to operate with cold logic, keeping emotion at bay. Emotions, I reminded myself, are fleeting and often lead to chaos when allowed to dictate decisions. I instructed my lawyer to handle all communication with my wife moving forward and informed her about the restraining order. I also made it clear that I didn't want anything from our home. No possessions, no furniture, and not the house itself. Every item was a reminder of her betrayal. My only concern was safeguarding my premarital investments and 401k. Then my lawyer asked the question that would define the course of the divorce. Did I want to aim for a fair settlement or go scorched earth? I paused, my mind replaying the nightmare of the last few days. A week earlier, I would have chosen fairness, wanting to preserve some shred of decency. But now, all I felt was hatred and disgust for the woman who had deceived me for years and destroyed my life so casually. I told her I wanted to pursue every possible avenue to make the divorce as painful as possible. Every victory, no matter how small, would be a symbolic act of retribution. I envisioned everything my lawyer secured for my wife going into a massive bonfire, one so large it could be seen from space. I also directed her to use the state's alienation of affection laws to pursue her affair partner. If he had a partner, I wanted her contacted, armed with the truth. I made it clear. I wanted them both to feel the full weight of what they had done. This wasn't about reconciliation or understanding. It was about vengeance. My wife had destroyed me, and I intended to return the favor tenfold. Let the pieces fall where they may. When my lawyer called to inform me my wife had been served at her workplace, I felt a grim satisfaction. She asked if I'd stop by after work to speak with the courier who had delivered the papers. Part of me hoped the courier might relay some story of dramatic proportions. Maybe even that my SDBXW had jumped out a window from the shock. I didn't expect that, of course, but I was curious to hear how it unfolded. At the office, I met with the messenger alone. He recounted arriving at her school around 10 a.m., checking in at the front office, and being escorted to her classroom by a staff member. She was mid-lesson when the staff member opened the door. The courier stepped inside, confirmed her name, and handed her the papers, announcing they were official divorce documents citing infidelity. He said she froze, her expression a mixture of shock and embarrassment, especially being served in front of her students. He walked out as she crumpled to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Hearing this brought no joy, just a cold sense of justice. She was finally facing the reality of what she had done. While I didn't feel vindicated, knowing she couldn't avoid the truth gave me a momentary sense of control in the chaos. Honestly, I'm not sure why I'm writing this all down. Maybe it's because it helps in some small way to get it out. I don't need advice. I already have a plan. The divorce is underway, and there's no going back. But I'm left with this hollow, crushing pain. I'm not suicidal. There's no part of me that wants to die. But I also can't imagine how to live. My wife didn't just betray me. She destroyed something rare and irreplaceable. What we had, or what I thought we had, was unique, and she burned it to the ground with her infidelity. She claimed to cherish our bond, a connection built on trust, love, and shared values. We believed in something old-fashioned, something sacred. The idea that two people could truly become one, without the baggage of past partners or fleeting lust. She said she was grateful for that countless times, and I believed her. I built my entire life around that belief. Now, I see it for what it was, a facade. I can't imagine rebuilding. I was raised to see relationships as a sacred union, a partnership between two people who discover and grow with each other in every way, including intimacy. For me, that's not just an ideal. It's a necessity. My wife and I shared that bond, or so I thought. It's not just about infidelity. It's about the foundation of everything we were. She defiled that. She turned something sacred into something filthy. Even if I could forgive her, which I can't, I'd never see her the same way. She's tainted in my eyes. A week ago, the thought of her was enough to spark affection, even desire. Now, if she stood before me, vulnerable and repentant, my only reaction would be disgust. The love I had for her was obliterated in an instant, replaced by an overwhelming loathing that consumes me every time I think of her betrayal. Because of how I was raised, I know I'll never have that connection with someone else. I wouldn't deserve it. I couldn't give another person, especially someone untouched by this world, the purity they deserve. And even if I could, I wouldn't want to. The idea of trying to build something new when my entire life was burned to ash feels impossible. I know many people would disagree with my perspective, especially in today's world. Some see sex and relationships as casual, even recreational. I'm not judging those who live differently. We all have our paths. But for me, it's always been about something deeper, something enduring. And now that's gone. My wife turned out to be someone I didn't recognize, a liar, a cheat, a Jezebel. As my grandmother might have said, I feel like a fool for ever believing otherwise. But what breaks me the most is the unfairness of it all. She committed the sin, but I'm the one sentenced to live in this hell. Alone. Forever. I've been throwing myself into work over the past few days, using my job as a lifeline to distract from the overwhelming despair. Progress has been steady. My office couch has even become a makeshift bed to avoid the hollow loneliness of a motel room. This morning started no differently. I intended to focus on my project and start my job search in other states. But then I noticed the date on my computer screen, and everything came crashing down. Today is my wife's birthday. I wasn't planning to acknowledge it. In fact, I hadn't even thought about it until now. But seeing the date triggered a cascade of memories. Good ones, ironically. Memories that are now poisoned by her betrayal. It struck me that no matter where I go or how far I run, I can never escape her completely. This date will always belong to her in my mind. And it's not just today. It's every upcoming holiday, every anniversary of something we shared. Every memory that once brought joy is now a bitter reminder of lies and deception. I feel trapped. Moving away might physically distance me from her, but she was my life for so long that she's ingrained in every part of my being. I want to forget her, to erase her completely from my mind. The memories that were a source of love and comfort just a week ago are now like daggers. I can't endure this relentless pain and constant reminder of what was and what will never be again. Life has a cruel way of dismantling everything you hold dear in the blink of an eye. One moment, you're secure, loved, and happy. The next, your entire world is ashes. I know my views and beliefs have drawn criticism, and that's fine. I stand by what I said because they are my truths. But it's hard not to feel cursed when something I valued so deeply, something I believed to be sacred, has been desecrated beyond repair. When things end, they truly end. And that includes life itself. I'm not seeking therapy to be told this isn't as bad as it feels, because it is as bad as it feels. My grandfather always told me not to blow smoke, especially not at myself. He was right. Sometimes, life doesn't grant happy endings or redemption arcs. Sometimes, it's just cruel.